Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back once again to Kingdom Living Center of Love Church here in the Kansas City, Missouri area. We have part 40 of our series on the book of Revelation, which I've been calling for 40 lessons now, if not more, a review of apocalyptic literature. One of the things I'll just point out real quick before we really jump into this lesson on chapter 14 is just how much we have to understand that we need to understand that what we read in the book of Revelation is a type of literature. It's a specific type of genre. And just as because it is a specific type of genre, we have to approach it in its as that type of genre in the appropriate way so that we can better make sense of it. For instance, no one is picking up comic books and trying to, modernly, and trying to model the world after a world full of, superheroes and supervillains, and we stand alone as, this superhero stand alone as the savior of the earth, or this collection of groups or avengers in that way. Similarly, when we look at poetry, we realize that when we're reading poetry that we allow for embellishment and for hyperbole, even in our music many times modernly, where we will say, hey, I'll give you the sun, the moon, the rain, the stars, and the mountains. Poetically, or in music, when we hear a line like that, we know, and as we hear it and understand it, or if I said that to my wife is not expecting me to, somehow finance a ship and then go and get her literally a star or a chunk of the moon, or to, uproot a mountain and literally bring them to her gift wrapped. We have to understand that same concept as it relates to apocalyptic literature. It is highly metaphoric. It is highly symbolic, and the pictures themselves are not the manifestation of the message itself. All right. So we got to keep that in mind as we study apocalyptic literature, because without that grounding, without understanding the purpose of a thing, then abuse is going to result. And I can certainly say that as I have, been working on this particular study for some time now, and, still, am interested in learning about it and just seeing how other people communicate this particular message about the book of Revelation. I see a lot of abuse. I see a lot of people, fear mongering and interpreting, or attempting to interpret. Many times they are reading in a number of things that simply aren't in the book of Revelation. Like the book of Revelation doesn't talk about, a rapture. It's not mentioned. Often what's happening is that they may pull an idea that they kind of developed or heard developed from another part of the Bible, and they have dumped it into the pages of the book of Revelation. But we're up to 14 chapters, and at no point does the text ever stop and say, hey, I'm going to snatch you out of the world and leave behind some other people. There's no passage in the book of Revelation that speaks in that way. But again, that's what I mean when we don't understand the purpose of a thing. We tend to start, again, dumping and mixing other things in there. But that's that is a common thing, but it's not the best way to understand this message. When we go to a funeral and read someone's obituary, where there may be small embellishes and flourishes about a person's life, and, when they got born again, those things may be true. We're not reading that as so much as entertainment as it is just to explain somewhat historically something about the person's life, who they left behind, who their parents were, what they did for a job, and things like that. But again, that's obituaries is a specific genre. They're written in a certain way, and we allow for that in our understanding of those particular texts. So I can talk about context and biblical context for quite some time, and we actually spent and did a whole lesson on that last week. Where I didn't read further into the book of Revelation, but I literally just stopped to talk about biblical context and the meaning of context and why that's so important. And I kind of did that surrounding the phrase precept upon precept. This is a phrase that I grew up hearing quite a bit, in church, and I hear it even more now and on social media, and certainly with the rise, and certainly with social media giving rise to what would otherwise be considered maybe minority religious voices, Hebrew Israelites or Black Hebrew Israelites, or what they may call themselves, just Israelites now. That's a phrase they often traffic in quite a bit as a way to say, the way that they approach the Bible is they may cut a little snippet of scripture here out and another passage here to maybe say formulate a theology that Jesus is a Black man. I see that a lot. Again, not to say that they are the only ones to do it, but it's something that many biblical teachers or religious group do. I've done it myself in the past, and I'm certainly training myself more and more as I study not to do that, but make sure if I'm going to quote a passage of scripture that I'm doing my best to do that within the context of how the author used it. But I've certainly been told in discussions with people that if I don't see a particular text the way they see it or the way they've explained it, then many times I'm not following precepts. And of course, this criticism comes more so from, Hebrew Israelites that I may have spoken to, but more so it's been non-Hebrew Israelites that just use this phrase to mean, precept upon precept is as the biblically mandated way by which one should hopscotch through the Bible and collecting texts to prove their particular point. For example, I've been told that in regards to the 144,000, that they are ethnically Jews, nothing else. That's all they can be, is ethnically Jews, and it's 144,000 of them that will be left behind when the rest of the church has been swept away and taken to heaven, in what they call the rapture. I don't believe that, but again, that's how it's often explained. And if I don't agree with that interpretation, then somehow I am not following the precepts or taking that same kind of checkers approach through the Bible. Well, this says something about the people of God being collected or being rescued, and so it must mean a rapture. Over the last couple of weeks, I've researched that passage in particular, and it's found in Isaiah, precept upon precept. It's actually it's part of a much larger passage that says precept upon precept basically 3 times in a row. Then it says line upon line, here a little, there a little. But again, it comes from Isaiah chapter 28, verse 10. And it's also repeated again in verse 13 of that same passage. And I unpacked the meaning of this particular phrase and how Isaiah himself used it. And I really want to know, as all the times that I had heard this phrase, is it how Isaiah used it, the way I hear preachers use it, the way I hear, Black Hebrew Israelites, or maybe someone that just online doesn't agree with me theologically about a particular interpretation of a passage. And what I found, which I suspected, is that this passage is often taken out of context and used improperly, to say that this is a biblical method of reading, studying, and sharing the word of God. When in fact, in context, and again, you can look at, some of the TikTok videos I've done. You can find certainly our videos that I've done for this particular ministry for Kingdom Living online on our church Facebook page at Kingdom Living Center of Love. And then also, if you want to view these on YouTube, you can certainly go to just type in Curtis Harris and then the word Revelation, and you'll find a series of messages and things like that I've done on the subject, at least the first 40 or so, close to 40. It's not 40 messages out there, but all the parts that have been specifically about the book of Revelation that started with chapter 1 and worked our way up to chapter 14. But, in context, what we find about this particular phrase is that it really is Isaiah just, putting together a bunch of monosyllables in Hebrew. Basically, he's saying like blah, blah, blah. He's characterizing or impersonating, I should say, some men who were criticizing him. But we've taken what Isaiah was using as a criticism, and we've built a theology of biblical study on it. And again, that's what I mean by that is out of context. Context is essential to our understanding of any biblical text. So again, especially that of chapter 14, which many times gets kind of recycled or to reinforce the messages, and many times that message that is out of context that not everyone, I don't want to say everyone, I don't want to characterize it in that way, but people often read into the book of Revelations. So with that, I keep mentioning this word context. Let's remember the context of this particular letter. Why are we here? Why are we talking about, something for my dinner coming up, pepper of some kind. I had lasagna. But let us remember the context of the book of Revelation, because that context doesn't change. Many times what we tend to do is compartmentalize Revelations chapters 1 through 3, where, kind of the introduction in these letters to the 7 churches. And then from chapter 4 on to the clear in the book, we tend to, use that to prognosticate or to make predictions about the end of the world. And again, we tend to, in Protestantism, or, that, i.e. non-Catholic, and I'm not Catholic, but we tend to read it, especially in America, as a almanac, depicting on how many people, predicting how many people will die, how many ships will be lost, how many trees will be destroyed, what portion or fraction of the population will be destroyed when this wormwood thing happens, and when this happened, and when this judgment happens, and when that judgment happens. Again, it's just a book. We tend to read it that way, but we tend to divorce ourselves from the message that John is trying to communicate to the audience that he wrote to in the first, in the second and third chapter, well, first through third chapter, as I kind of put it before. So we need to remember that John the Revelator, or why he's writing and what he's writing in, and for what reason, what is he trying to accomplish in this particular letter. So let's look at that right now. And again, this is what I mean when I say that context matters, because without that information, without that context, then we are going to do the text a great disservice. So when we're looking at context, a lot of times we want to know who the author is writing to, what they're saying to this particular audience. Where is this audience? Is that relevant? Many times geography is relevant to the message that is being mentioned. We saw that earlier in the book of Revelation when we talk about, hey, I'd rather have you hot or cold, but if you're lukewarm. So if you're interested in what that phrase means in context, and that's probably a good example of how that phrase is many times taken out of context to our own detriment as a body, and we tend to teach a gospel or preach a message about Jesus Christ that is inaccurate because we don't understand that phrase, hot, cold, and lukewarm, within context. So John the Revelator, and again, who was John? He was an elder in the church. Is this John the beloved, who was a disciple of Jesus Christ, and that apostle who we believe is the author behind the book of St. John, and also the one who is responsible for the books of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? Is that John all one and the same? I would certainly say it could be not. That's not something I think is detrimental as far as identifying this particular John. We do know he is an elder of some type in the church. much beyond that. I mean, if it's that John the Beloved, then great. If it's not him, it's another, guy named Johann or John, Yochanan, then hey, that's fine. Let's roll with it. He seems to have had a vision that is relevant to the church and minister to the church. We do know that this John, based upon what we read in the first chapter, that he was a exiled prisoner on the Isle of Patmos, which is off the coast of Asia Minor in the Aegean Sea. So if you want to get you out a map, you can certainly find Turkey and the western coast of Turkey. Southwestern corner of the country will lead you to the Aegean Sea, which is part of the Mediterranean. Again, he is a prisoner exiled during the height and reign of the Roman Empire. This is when we understand all the different Caesars. So if you mention Julius and Tiberius and Augustus and Caligula and Nero and Hadrian and Vespasian and Titus and just so many of those different emperors, and certainly associate many times with the Roman Empire is the imperial cult, which we've talked about. This was the kind of nationalistic worship of the Caesars as deity themselves, if not divus, I think is the other way. So sons of gods themselves. So and this was put Christianity in conflict with the Roman Empire. It's funny that in the Roman Empire, what the Roman citizens would have called an atheist would be Christians, because they didn't participate, or they tried to, they didn't want to, sprinkle incense to the worship of a Caesar, to a man other than Jesus Christ. They didn't want to partake in the different festivals of the time that would have them compromise themselves with prostitutes and other, occultic, practices of the time. So, but again, if you are a Christian in that day and you're not participating in, local festivals and stuff like that, you're the non-believer. You are the atheist. So that's for that, that idea. So again, we see this conflict with what it is to worship God and Jesus as what it is to be a citizen of Rome. We're told why John is exiled. It says in this found in chapter 1 of Revelation, verse 10. He says that he's exiled there because of the word of God and his testimony of Jesus Christ. So again, not only is John suffering persecution for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and again, and this is in contrast to the Roman imperial code, which again they wanted you to perform. If you needed to go and buy and sell, then hey, we in the marketplace, you might need to sprinkle some incense in worship of Caesar. And again, your heart didn't have to necessarily believe that Caesar was a god himself, but again, performance is what the Roman Empire wanted. They wanted the loyalty, they wanted performance, they wanted you to show your duty. So you had to do those things. If not, then you were looked at as an outsider. There were certainly a lot of benefits and perks that came along with being recognized as a city of the Roman Empire. If you got citizenship, that came along with a lot of things, but you had to compromise a lot of things in order for that particular status. So when we look at the what of the context of the book of Revelation, then it's written because John says the Spirit of God prompts him to record this message, this vision that is opened up. And of course, we see all these symbols. And again, that is characteristic of apocalyptic literature. Again, we have to remember, as I said earlier, that an apocalypse is a literary genre. It's a type. It's like a romance novel, is a genre. It's like a comedy. It's like sci-fi is a genre, and you read it a certain way. Many times that is for its entertainment value. But when we look at the book of Revelations or the apocalyptic literature, we find that, again, it is highly symbolic, it is highly metaphoric, but this is not the only apocalyptic literature that we have in the Protestant Bible, which, 66 books in total. The book of Joel is an apocalypse. Zechariah, parts of it, Ezekiel, parts of it, the book of Daniel, parts of it. But again, the largest collection size-wise would be the book of Revelation, is the largest apocalypse that we have. But of course, this genre is not found only in our 66 books of our Bible, Protestant Bible, but you will find this even in what we call the Apocrypha, which is part of the Catholic Bible and the Ethiopic Coptic Church's Bible. You'll find things like in the book of Enoch, also, I want to say Baruch, is another, non-canonical, we call it, or not part of the canon books. That do contain, apocalyptic literature. So this is a style of writing. And again, because we are less familiar with it, we may not understand, its use and how it functioned in these particular societies, especially the early church, where John is certainly writing, as he says early in the book, to 7 churches of Asia Minor. These are significant cities in the Roman world. So we're talking like Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamum and Thyatira and Sardis, Philadelphia and Laodicea. All these cities are certainly mentioned there, and these are real historic cities. And again, these cities were significant in many ways. They certainly were not slouches. But again, there are, church populations there, and John is certainly writing to comfort them in the difficulty that they may be going through, like he himself is exiled, and he is certainly wanting to, admonish them in those areas where they are failing or not doing well. If you kind of remember in one of the letters, I believe it's to Ephesus, hey, you've done this well, you've done this well. So exhortation is a huge part of apocalyptic literature in the midst of tribulation, but there is admonishment saying, hey, Jesus said, y'all have left your first love. And if you don't come back and do your first works from the beginning, then I'm going to come and remove your lampstand. And so this is what apocalyptic literature does. I mean, it is for comfort, it is for exhortation, it is for admonition of the church, oftentimes because there is great hardship, or let's use this word that we hear a lot about the book of Revelation, great tribulation. Now, this message is certainly true, and this message is meant to resonate with the church that John is writing to. And again, in order to understand this particular message, we have to understand that there is a long-standing history in Jewish communities in the Bible where we see prophets employ this type of writing or use this type of literature, again, to speak in those moments of an end of time or end of an age where their suffering will come to an end and God will once again restore them, that we rebuild their temple, and he will make all things better. That's certainly something we see occupy one of the largest section of the book of Ezekiel. We're talking about the temples measured and remade, and it's bigger and better than the worshipers, and even the worshipers getting a new heart and a new flesh and everything like that. And that, I think that's the picture of the Valley of Dry Bones. I want to say, have you ever read through that? That's part of the apocalyptic sections of the book of Ezekiel. Where we often go wrong interpretively is that we try and interpret this message for our world, for our day, for our situation, without understanding it first for how it functioned in John's world and in John's audience, and to these 7 churches in Asia Minor and other surrounding communities that would have circulated this particular letter, and again looked for the comfort and the exhortation and admonition in times of great hardship for them. We often are trying to look at CNN and see what Russia is doing and what some other Arab nation is doing in relation to Israel, and we try to understand it through that lens first, instead of trying to understand the context that John is obviously speaking to. And again, this is the way I try to approach all my biblical studies now. Did I always do this? No, this is something I certainly had to learn. And maybe sometimes when you take a learned approach to things and don't necessarily you're not as free and embellish, and hack and, run up the scales and stuff like that as some other, as they do in some other, religious traditions, often Black religious traditions, then, people are saying you're not preaching or not teaching and stuff like that. But hey, I got to be who God has made me to be and do it the way he's given it to me to be. But the Bible, and understand me when I say this, the Bible was not written to us. When I say us, I mean those of you who, if at any time you are seeing this either online or on Facebook or YouTube, this Bible was not written to people who live that type of life, who have the technology that we have to broadcast a message about the Bible online and stream it to our phones or to our tablets or to our TVs, or we're sitting in an air-conditioned studio audience with microphones and lighting and stuff like that. It's not written to people who spoke English. This Bible is written to people who spoke a completely different language than most of us speak. It's written to a people who was much more primitive in comparison to our own, though they had a number of technological things. Rome was very technologically advanced, but not in the sense of Wi-Fi and, Starbucks, coffee, kind of cafes and stuff, not in that sense. But again, these people are much different from us, and their humor, their literary genres are much different in many ways than ours, and some of theirs is much different. But now I say that again, the Bible is not written to us. It's not written in English. It's been translated into English, but again, the translation is not always going to be the exact, because again, idioms and slang and all those things change. And, again, how do you translate to someone in, French, that it's raining cats and dogs, I mean, even modernly, that's not a phrase that they use if it's raining hard outside. They say the ropes or the cords are falling, you know what I mean? But what if someone said that to you in French, tome de corde, and said, oh, it means the ropes are falling. I mean, you could probably get to what that person is trying to say. But again, imagine that going back 2,000 years. I mean, again, there's going to be some things lost in translation. So again, I say this again. And I hope you hear me when I say this, that the Bible's not written to us, you and me. And even, Jewish people and, Turkish Christians, the Bible modernly were not written to them either, although they may be better with the language and understanding it. But the Bible is for us. The Bible is not written to us, but certainly the Bible is for us all. Again, all these words are certainly given to us as well for instruction in righteousness, for learning, for teaching, for correction. I believe that. But again, it just wasn't written, because if it was written to me, written to us, it would be in a language that we would find originally, that we find a lot better, where we understand the verb tenses and all those things like that. So again, an apocalypse in proper context is going to come across much differently than if we are simply just opening the pages and just freelancing and just saying, hey, well, the Spirit told me to tell y'all that, this particular phrase, hot and cold and lukewarm, mean this. Well, you may have been inspired to say something, but again, we need to make sure that we try those spirits that we say have inspired us to say a particular thing by studying, the same Bible that says try the Spirit tells us that, hey, study to show ourselves approved, workmen who need not be ashamed, rightfully dividing the word of truth. We need to understand what this book is saying. And again, I'm not saying anyone has to go out and get a degree like I did, but I am too and part of the body of Christ. And the scholarship that I am learning, that I'm investing time and money and energy in learning about the Bible, it's for the benefit of the body. So I'm not taking it and trying to hoard it for myself. But again, I think we all need to exercise humility in this process of learning, teaching, and growing. And of course, just like with Apollo, if you have something that's not complete, hopefully someone, filled with the Spirit of God and understanding will come along and help, me to understand some things more clearly as well. So with that, let's jump into Revelation chapter 14. I'm going to start over. I know we've read it, half a way through before, but I want to reread it and kind of keep that context that I had before you, kind of in mind as far as what John is attempting to do with this message, that he is trying to exhort, he is trying to comfort and admonish the church that is either in a time of great tribulation, about to go through a great time of tribulation. Again, he says this in those first couple chapters about, hey, some of you guys are sitting in the seat of Satan. Some of you are in the synagogue of the devil. And, some of you, Satan is going to throw in jail for 10 days and, and so forth. And hopefully as we read through 14, keeping this context in mind, it'll make a little bit more sense. Let me change my screen share real quick. There we go. All right, hopefully you can see that there. All right. Certainly, let me say this about some headings that we see here in this book here. The Lamb and the 144,000, these are certainly added by the translators and to hopefully kind of give you a little clarity on what you're about to read. But sometimes these things aren't the most helpful. They are not part of the original transcripts and, things that we have as far as translation goes. But, so just kind of keep that in mind. Sometimes these headings are what, get us in trouble sometimes, especially when it came to, the rapture, how that's been baked so deeply into our, American Protestant, kind of Pentecostal, not even Pentecostal force, but just Protestant understanding is that many of our Bibles contain, as they were being translated, like the Schofield Study Bible, the Dake's Annotated Reference Bible, many times it contains the preacher's notes and headings. And so they come up to a heading and said, hey, this is the rapture, And so people said, okay, well, there go the rapture. That is bold there. That's what this whole section of scripture is about. It's about a rapture. And unfortunately, those notes many times are biased. In addition to having notes about what they believe are scriptures about a rapture, they also had scriptures about the curse of Ham that said that Black people were to be subservient to white people, in the margins, and found other proof texts that supported those ideas. So, I just want to warn, hey, these are here. Not saying they're all bad, but not saying they're all accurate either. So, I would say take them with a grain of salt. So we got our context in mind again, who John is writing to, why he's writing, and what he's hoping to accomplish in these. Again, the comfort, exhortation, admonishment, again, that's the correction, of the church. And again, we talked a lot about what the church is. Again, not a building, not an organization, not a day of the week event, but a family, a collection of brothers and sisters, a family, a community. That's what the church is. And he says here in verse 1:14:1, he says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, or Sion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. And of course, we talked about this particular number in great lengths, going all the way back to chapter 7, that this is a very it's a perfect 12 times 12 is 144, and again, this represents that great multitude. All the numbers in the book of Revelation we find are metaphoric. Again, we have said that the Great Tribulation lasts only 7 years, but it actually doesn't say the Great Tribulation in Revelation lasts 7 years. It actually breaks it up and says, well, there's 3.5 and another 3.5 for this and a 3.5 for that. That 3.5 is used quite frequently through these first, 13, 14 chapters of the book of Revelation. And really what the 3.5 is represents a broken 7. The number 7, of course, we've talked about this quite a bit, is that the number 7 is the number of completion in Hebrew understanding, just like as we're judging a dunk contest, or we're judging on a scale of 1 to 10, how we like a particular thing. If we throw up a 10, that's to say, hey, that's perfect. Of course, and there's numbers so much higher than 10. You can say 100, or you can say 1,000, but we in our society, we say 10. And then in ancient Hebrew context and conceptualization of life, if they want to say something is perfect and complete, they would use the number 7. Again, that's their culture. It's their language. Again, if God was writing, if these biblical writers are writing directly to us, guess what number they would use often? They would use 10, or they would put 5 in there to represent that 3.5 or that broken 10. But again, they use 3.5. And again, just to represent broken 7. Of course, there's going to be a lot other, metaphoric numbers in here, like, again, the 1,000-year millennial reign. That is another metaphoric number, a symbolic number. Of course, we see this number in the Old Testament quite a bit, that, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. It's not meant to be a literal thing that God, again, God doesn't regard time the same way we do. But again, better is one day in your house, better is one day in his courts than 1,000 elsewhere. Again, that's obviously metaphorical. Again, it's to show that, hey, it's better to be with God than anywhere else, regardless of the amount of time. Another one would be that one will put 1,000 to flight, and two will put 10,000. Again, it's metaphoric, just to say, hey, the efforts of one or the few are relevant to things beyond we can comprehend or quantify in any way. The Bible uses a number of metaphoric numbers. Again, we're going to see one at the very end of this. Let me just scroll down to it, of this chapter, where it says, and again, this may be intentional by the writer. In this section, of course, they didn't chop the book up in sections like we do as far as chapter and verse. But notice here that you have, and the winepress was trodden without the city, and the blood came out of the winepress even unto the horses' bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. If we want to do a little math real quick here, 1,600 is really another perfect number, a gross, just like 12 times 12 is 144. We actually get 16, that's 4 times 4, right? So really 40 times 40 equals 1,600. So 16 furlongs, or this is also a word that may be translated stadia, S-T-A-D-I-A. This is really a word I actually learned when I was in Israel, because they had uncovered a an actual stadium, an arena, on the coast of Caesarea Maritima, I believe it was. And of course, the stadia is where we get the word stadium, but again, 40. How many times is the number 40 used? How many things or ways can you think to use the number 40? Or that the way the Old Testament uses the number 40, or even the New Testament? How about, Moses was said to be, 40 when he, left Egypt, according to, the book of Acts. And of course, when he went back, 40 years later. How about Moses on the mount for 40 days and 40 days, and then we have the golden calf incident, or Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, for 40 days. How about it rained Noah's Ark, for 40 days and for 40 nights. And so when we look at the number 40, we often associate that, or not we, but in Hebrew, or in the Jewish conceptualization of it, it is the number of testing. It is the number of testing. And again, it's just to round it off. Instead of saying 40 days, they say 40 times 40 gives you 1,600 furlongs, But again, this is the concept that is being communicated here. Just like, there's 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, there's 12 apostles, And so with the people of God, hey, that's a perfect, that's what we call a gross mathematically. So, hey, let's put a K on it, And again, but this represents all the people of God, the people of God. And again, if you be Christ, then are you Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. But again, this number is actually translated in Romans, Revelations chapter 7, where he hears the census. And then he actually turns and sees the reality of what he's just heard. And again, he sees this multitude that could not be counted. Again, the most important things we need to know about the book of Revelation are literally translated in the book for us. That is something characteristic of an apocalypse. We see this in the book of Daniel as well and whatnot. So let me clear all this out. Hopefully, that all makes sense. But again, so we kind of start off with these two. We kind of begin this chapter and end this chapter with those same numbers, which I think is, relevant and important to how we understand this particular book. All right. And so again, we see a lamb stood on Mount Zion. And of course, this imagery itself is often borrowed from the Old Testament. You actually look in, I want to say, the book of Joel, chapter 2, the very last verse. You'll see the same kind of image there. Again, and I've said this before and I'll repeat it here, the best way to understand the book of Revelation, the 66th book of our Protestant Bible, is to understand the previous 65, right? And so we see these people of God standing on Mount Zion with the Lamb, and they have this Father's name written in their foreheads. As much as we talk about the mark of the beast, the Bible also in Revelation talks about the mark of the saints, the mark on the saints, the Father, as well. And of course, this is imagery that comes from the book of Zechariah, which we talked about quite a bit. And I heard a voice. And again, I just love this word, they stood, get my mouse out here, they stood, I think that's important that, if you're writing to a people who is oppressed and, going through great tribulation and hardship, guess what they need to do as it relates to their faith? They're being pulled on by the culture and by the world to compromise and to, hey, those prostitutes in the temple, go ahead and go on up there and relieve yourself. Well, go ahead and, sacrifice to this God and this will happen good for you. And, well, you got to feed your family, just go and worship Caesar and go on in there and get what you need, man. Quit all this foolishness. Quit being the atheist, as I kind of mentioned. And so we have here a picture where John is saying, hey, this is what I'm saying. That the people of God, the true people of God, the church, they are standing on Mount Zion, that place where the temple was. It was a place of victory where, hey, if we can vanquish our enemies, this is certainly a picture that shows, might. They're standing there and they're marked there. Hey, it's clear who they belong to. They're not wavering. Isn't that in James somewhere that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, and let not that man think he'll receive anything from God. Hey, but these people are resolute. This is where we are. And hey, if later on we'll find out, hey, if this costs me my life, then that is the price I pay. But I'm not going to waver in my devotion to the one true King of all the world. You may be able to kill this body, but you can't, I know someone who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. Is a way to speak. You see the encouragement that they would have read, with this particular context. Verse 2, and I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, as the voice of a great thunder, and I hear the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And certainly this reminds me, and I'm not sure what pictures John is exactly pointing to, but we can see in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, where the voice of God is, hey, it's like a thunder and many waters. This is certainly something we see in the book of Exodus when the children of Israel are about to be given the word of God. The 10 sayings are what we call the 10 Commandments, modernly. Again, they hear this thunders, hey, it's loud and, it's scary in many ways. And they sung, as it were, but he hears music, and they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the 4 beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from earth. Again, people will easily throw rapture stuff on here. These people are on Mount Zion, that's heaven, and they've been raptured. But again, that's just not something that John is trying to preach here. John is trying to help people who are living here on the earth, going through great hardship. He is trying to admonish them. He is trying to exhort them and comfort them in their hour of testing. That 40 times 40, it's not just a little test, but it's 40. Not just 40 days, but it's 40 times 40. It's like that. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And certainly we have here in this verse here a lot of, again, John is really leaning on that Jewish, understanding and intellect. When we talk about warfare, and this is kind of the picture of this army standing with the Lamb, we talked about this before, where in the census, or before, I should say, before the men of the Hebrew men, before they would go out to war, that, hey, they were supposed to be abstinent from sexual encounters with their wives. Even before, this is something we see, and I had this in a couple previous messages on this with David, when him and his mighty men are running from Saul, and they go to the temple, and there they take the showbread. They're able to eat it, and the priest asks them, say, hey, have you guys kept yourselves from your wives? And they're like, yeah. And so they're, all right, go ahead and eat. And so this ritual purity here is what's being alluded to in verse 4. And this is just something that, hey, bodily fluids was something that defiled a person. Not that sex, amongst their wives were wrong. It's just, hey, bodily fluids made you ritually unclean for a time. And, and until that, either the night or you were cleansed again, then, hey, just part of it. That's a long lesson, but we can get into that one day. These are they which follow the Lamb, whatsoever he goes. This is who these people are. They follow the Lamb. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And so we can spend some time talking about first fruits, and we've done that in the past. And but if you have a question specifically about that, give me a call and we'll talk about first fruits. And in their mouth was no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. These are simply people. This is the church, a picture of the church and what the church should be, that, hey, we don't compromise. We don't, we shouldn't allow ourselves to be, compromised in any way from the influence that are coming, in and amongst and around them, and that we're pulling on them in real ways. But again, metaphorically, this is what this is alluding to. Again, people try to make this 144, hey, just really 144,000 virgins that never tell a lie. If you a man, come on now. If you a woman, that don't even fit. Again, it's funny how people tend to read certain parts of this stuff super literally, and then they just dismiss the rest of it as, well, something else. No, it's all metaphorical here. That's what this thing traffics in, symbols. And again, because this is not culturally normative for us, we tend to append the wrong message to these images, and make them, into what we want. But we need to ground these in the understanding of the Old Testament and the rest of the Bible. Verse 6. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them. And so here's where we get to these kind of three angelic proclamations we talked about last week, and I have a slide for these. We'll come back. So I'll just read them pretty quick here. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. This, this is the same way that 144,000 is made up of. Every tribe, nation, tongue is multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual. It's beautiful. Same thing is, again, what we see in chapter 7 about the great multitude. And this 144,000 is mentioned. This is the third or fourth mention of that here. Saying with a loud voice, verse 7, with a loud voice, fear God. So this is the everlasting gospel. Fear God. Isn't that the beginning of wisdom, we're told? And give glory to him. Isn't this the whole duty of man, to fear God and to worship him, or something like that? I think it's book of Ecclesiastes, the way that writer sums it up. For the hour of his judgment has come. Hey, as good as God is, and all the glory and power is due his name, hey, judgment is also a part of this message, and that, hey, it is coming upon the world. And worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. This certain language certainly goes all the way back, I believe, to Genesis chapter 1, and the God orders or creates the world as we tend to explain it, but ordering of creation, that he is responsible for all of it. It reminds me of so much of what we read in the book of Psalms as well. And there followed another angel. So the second angelic proclamation, Babylon is fallen. I actually like this fallen. It reminds me of a Greek word called epizeusis, which is, we tend to do this in Black culture a lot, is that we tend to double up on a word to emphasize it. So, you sleepy sleep. You sleep. You call somebody super groggy. You sleep. You sleep. Or you hungry. You mad. So, you done. Same thing here, is that emphasis that, hey, this is a done deal. This is what is going to happen. This is the fate. This is the verdict. This is the judgment on Babylon. And certainly Babylon represents something as well here. It represents the world. Certainly for John's audience, it represented the Roman Empire. That is responsible largely for their persecution and what they are feeling in his day and time. That great city, because she made all nations, this is why, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, which we'll talk about more about Babylon. We're going to get more about Babylon to come. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink. Here we got a different drink now. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Now remember, let me go back real quick. Now remember what John is writing here. He's writing to comfort, to exhort, to say, hey, keep going. Hey, don't give up. Don't quit. You're gonna get there. But he's also here to admonish, to say, hey, if y'all give up, if you cave in, If you drink of that same cup of the wine let me go back to it here. If you drink of the wrath, the wine of the wrath of her fornication of Babylon, Rome or whatever city you want, modern, we stay with Rome for now, or with Babylon or Egypt, then the same, then you will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God. That is a message to John's audience. He said, hey, I know what they're doing. I know the evil. I know the treachery that they can visit upon people, how they are, can burn someone as a lamp in their gardens, or how they will throw you into an arena, and have wild animals seize upon you and tear you asunder, and they sit there and applaud that type of carnage. I know that they are going to persecute you and throw you into jail. But if you should give in, then I have to tell you, the same will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture, literally meaning full strength, into the cup of his indignation. Talking about God's indignation, which we're going to see these cups, this mixture in chapter 15 when we get to the vials or the bowl judgments. And he shall be tormented. You think you're escaping something now because you compromised, because you can get a meal, or hey, they're not going to lop your head off because you swore allegiance to Caesar is your God. Again, remember that though you believe you are escaping death in this world, this is an admonition here, this is admonishing them, he shall be tormented with fire and with brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. And again, this is that often characteristic of apocalyptic literature where it presents the choices as binary. It's either this or this, either one or the other. Ain't no in between, ain't no, and that's just characteristic of apocalyptic literature. And it's to say, hey, your defeat, if you should give in, is going to be the defeat, which is of Babylon, which is fallen. You will be like, what we saw in Sodom and Gomorrah. And the smoke of their torment is scented up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night. Again, this is characteristic of what we saw in the book of Genesis when fire and brimstone and judgment of God came upon, Sodom and Gomorrah and those other cities, which, the book of Ezekiel says that, it was because they were overfed and they did not take care of the widows and poor, the widow and poor, and they didn't do justice. They perverted justice as to why these cities are destroyed. But again, John is leaning back upon that, and the picture is so very clear for his church audience that he is addressing. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. You're not avoiding it. You may get temporary relief, but there's something, he's contrasting that with, kind of this eternal damnation, so to speak, picture that, hey, it was said that even in the New Testament that the smoke still was rising from the place where Sodom and Gomorrah was, I believe. I need to check that reference though. And then he contrasted. Here's the contrast, okay? You've seen it. We talked about the smoke and the torment and, all that. But here's the exhortation. Here's the exhortation. Let me look back at this list again. Here's the exhortation for comfort, exhortation. We've just been admonished of the church in great hardship and tribulation. So now look at the contrast here. Oops. Okay, I changed it back. Here we go. Here's the patience of the saints. Here. This is what you need to know. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. No, Caesar is not your Lord. And yeah, they are going to come and they may tell you, hey, we actually find letters historically of, I want to say it's Pliny the Younger, who's writing to Trajan, a emperor of Rome, saying, hey, I got these Christians in my province of Bithynia. This is in northern Turkey, and they've come and, they have been handed over to me as being Christians, and I interrogate them and torture them, and, I give them a chance to swear allegiance to you, and if they don't, then I murder, I have them killed. I'm writing to you, Trajan, basically to say, hey, Emperor, is this what I should do? And Trajan says, hey, yeah, you've handled it pretty well, but hey, don't go after people simply because you have word that they are called Christians. People can use this, basically, I think he was getting at, to say, people can use that to manipulate and take out their political enemies and, rivals and competition and in different areas just by saying they're a Christian. So, but hey, if you do interrogate them, hey, what you're doing so far is fine. Keep going, keep it up. And, so again, imagine living in a world that way. And John is saying, hey, here is the patience of the saints. Here is how you remain up under. This is what the word patience means. I want to say it's epizeusis. I need to look that up to be sure. But it's to remain up under. Here are they that keep the commandments of God. The 144,000, this is what they do. They follow God wherever he goes. Whereas those that took the mark of the beast, they're those who are devoted to him. Whereas those who have the mark of God and the Lamb in their forehead, they are those that are devoted to God. John is making that clear in this particular chapter. And he says, and lo, verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, right blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. So again, more exhortation here that, hey, and again, the fact that he says that it comes from heaven, again, this is my beloved son in whom I mean, that's a message. The 10 sayings from the Exodus chapter 20 or so, and I'm the Lord thy God who brought you forth out of Egypt, put some respect on my name, keep the Sabbath, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. That's what happened to other gods before me, and on, honor your mother, your father, don't lie, all that. I mean, when you put God, that God has said it, that a voice comes from heaven, that just charges it all the more. This is so much, all the more important. Again, this is my beloved son, seeing that, again, this is what the mind is supposed to do as we read through the book of Revelation, is to lean upon all those other contextual clues that we have to give meaning to these symbols. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, right, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. So if they do take your head, they take your hand, they take your family from you, because you won't bow down and give into, drink the fornication of Babylon, of the wrath of the fornication of Babylon. Hey, you all right? There's a reward for you. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works do follow them. It's not for nothing. Although the world may see it as a dismissal of a nuisance in some way, God sees it much differently, that your labors will follow you. Remember, he says to the church earlier on that, hey, if you stand, if you hold on, I will make you a temple in my Father's house, a pillar that cannot be, shaken and broken to pieces. That's the repeated refrain we get in those first 7 letters: to hold on, to stand fast, to krato in the Greek, and then we get the other word, tereo, I believe it's pronounced. And then in chapter 14, now this is where, after we get beyond these 3 proclamations, we get into more imagery about harvesting and wheat and whatnot. And I think I might need to do that in a separate message, because I think, let's see how much time we're at right All right, I'm at the hour, so I better stop here. And what I'll do another message 14 on, because we need to take some time and unpack that. But hopefully, just reading this letter within that context, which we have discussed here. Again, who John is writing to, what this particular genre is and what it's meant to accomplish, where he is, when he is. And I guess I didn't talk about when he is, but of course, there's some conjecture about when this book is written. Some people say as late as the first century, 96 AD, and some people say, hey, it's written before 70 AD, before the destruction of the temple. Again, regardless of the actual date of it, how it functions, I think, is what's more important. Again, an apocalypse, it is to comfort, bring works of exhortation and admonition for the church, for the people of God, going through great hardship, or about to go through great tribulation. The book of Revelation is not a almanac. It is not a plan for how the world will end. It tells you that, hey, whenever the age is over, guess who's responsible for it? Jesus himself. But there's nothing here that tells us a day. There's nothing here that tells us an hour. I mean, we're told that in the Gospels, that there's, no man knoweth the day, the time, or the hour except the Father which is in heaven, which that is some marriage language, which we taught on early in that. You can find those messages on YouTube. We're also on our church Facebook page. But again, hopefully this message has been helpful for you, and we'll work on chapter 14, verse 14 to the end in another message. All right. Y'all be blessed.